Tonight on Training Camp News, more big contracts, depth chart movement, injuries and retirements, plus, most importantly, what does this mean for your fantasy football team? All on the Fantasy First Down. Welcome back to the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Can you believe it's week 2 of training camp already? There's been heaps of news that's caused me to make some movements in my rankings. I hope you guys are keeping up. We're going to go through a heap of stuff today. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe on YouTube. You can also check us out on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. I answer all of your DMs over there. We've also got a competition running over there at the moment where you get an opportunity to play against me and my colleagues in the FFD League. So make sure you check that out. That's going to close once the Hall of Fame game starts because it's about picking the correct score in the Hall of Fame game. So head over to our Instagram account. Make sure you follow that as well for more great content. You can also find me on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. Plus, I write all of my articles over at football.rasball.com, and my rankings are found at ffdfantasyfootball.com. Today, we're going through training camp news. So if you haven't seen this before, here's how it's going to work. Basically, the ranking you can see there is the redraft ranking on the left and the dynasty ranking on the right. I'm going to take you through the news, tell you whether this is important or not. The arrows kind of indicate what it means for the players involved. And then we're going to talk about the fantasy implications. We're going to start things off with a couple of big contracts. Jordan Love signing a blockbuster 4-year deal with the Packers after his big finish last year. This is a positive thing for Love, given the alternative was that he doesn't sign a contract at all. That just gives more of a more likelihood of him moving to a different team. I think that was always rather unlikely, which is why I've only got him shifting up a little bit. For me, he's still a solid option for this year. Most of the leagues I've been in, people have been taking him a little bit too early for me. I haven't got any shares, but if he falls into the right region, I think he's a solid fantasy option. I just don't think he's likely to back up what he did last year for fantasy. Another guy getting a big contract is Tua Tagovailoa. I think this is a great deal for him. It's a little bit of a scary one because of his head injuries, but I do think it makes sense for the Dolphins to shore up their guy. Very talented player, like him a lot. And for fantasy, again, this is just one of those situations where the alternative was that we don't really know what's going to happen. For this season, he was always going to play for the Dolphins, so it doesn't really make a big redraft difference. But I think it helps him a little bit in Dynasty. The fact that he's got that big contract, I mean, he's less likely to drift out of the league quickly. So I moved him up one spot because of this. But realistically, he's still in that same general area along with all those other guys. Now, more quarterback news. The Colts don't plan on limiting Anthony Richardson as a runner. That's via Shane Steichen directly. I think this is probably good news, but we kind of expected it with early quarterbacks who run a lot. You do generally find that they're going to keep running in their first couple of seasons. I don't think that freak injury was ever going to slow them down. We've already heard Richardson come out and say he's not going to change the way he plays. So this is positive news, but I didn't actually make any movements in my rankings because of him. I think in Dynasty, if anything, this isn't great news. Players that are going to have to rely on their legs a lot generally have worse longevity and are going to get more injuries. So I don't know. You can take this news either way. For me, it's a slight positive, but I'm not moving him anywhere. I'm still taking him in that same range. And in a lot of the leagues I'm watching, he's going way too early anyway. Let's talk about running backs. So we've heard that Kyren Williams is the clear number one and will carry the load if healthy. Been getting little bits of drips and drabs of this sort of news, and this is just kind of confirming this. This is from Charles Robinson out of Yahoo Sports. I mean, for me, he's still a clear late first round, early second round option. I think there's huge upside there. Corum is a little bit scary, and no matter how much we hear of this news, if Williams struggles a little bit, they're more likely to get Corum involved than they would have been if they didn't have him and it was just Ronnie Rivers backing him up. So there's still going to be some natural risk there compared to what we thought was going to happen before they drafted Corum. But realistically, it's positive to hear the continued reports of Williams being the clear number one guy. Meanwhile, for the Chargers, and Gus Edwards has had his first day of training camp on Tuesday, and reportedly he split with J.K. Dobbins with first team reps. And I think we kind of knew that was going to happen. It might be that Edwards takes over even more, but it was pretty clear that something was heading in this direction. Edwards was always going to be the clear number one guy. Dobbins was always going to be the clear number two. This changes absolutely nothing. It's just good to have confirmation of what we already expected would occur. Meanwhile, in Dallas, things have mixed up a little bit. Royce Freeman could apparently be the team's number two back. And usually, when this sort of speculation happens, I don't really listen to it too much. But this is a direct quote from Stephen Jones, who's their executive vice president. So he knows kind of what he's talking about. It does mean a little bit more. It'd be better if it was from a coach, obviously. But we are talking about a guy who does have his finger on the pulse a little bit. Jones said he's a great 2-3 combination in terms of what he can do as a backup. We'll let these young guys between Dowdle and Davis, and he did name check them, and those guys battle it out. Now, that could mean anything. It could mean battle it out for that other spot. It could mean they do see Freeman as a clear backup. They didn't say number two back, but the implication was kind of that he was there as a backup. I'm not sure that I'm fully believing this, but this does make me a lot more nervous about Dowdle than I was previously. I was thinking that Dowdle probably had at least an even chance of being in a committee with Zeke, and now I'm thinking it's probably going to be Zeke with Dowdle just a little bit behind him and Freeman more involved than we hoped. So this is bad news for Dowdle, certainly. It's good news for Freeman, but I'm still taking Dowdle well ahead of Freeman. I think even if Freeman starts as the number two back, Dowdle's going to win that quickly. Meanwhile, in surprising news for a lot of people who have been loving Kamani Vidal, I'm not one of them, by the way, Jarrett Pedersen's running well ahead of him. He was running with the first. Obviously, we talked about Gus Edwards being out. They put Vidal with the twos, and he's obviously remained with the twos with Gus Edwards coming back, and Patterson's joined him there. So it does seem to suggest that on the depth chart, Kamani Vidal is at least fourth. Now, that can happen with rookies in a lot of situations. A lot of teams will start them out low and make them fight their way up, and it could be the case here. But I've kind of been expecting that Vidal was going to be the number three anyway. This is obviously bad news. It suggests he might be even lower, but look, this shouldn't be a big shock to anybody who's been watching this channel for a while. I've always been saying it's going to be Gus Edwards, then it's going to be J.K. Dobbins, and then a little bit of Vidal. This maybe just means it's not even a little bit of Vidal at all. So he's someone that you don't particularly want in any leagues. In Dynasty, I think probably if you've got shares, you have to hold him. In redraft, he's definitely droppable. Now, Chase Brown continues to take the majority of reps with the ones. Now, what does that mean? Well, when you take it in conjunction with the Duke Tobin quote, which says Chase Brown will have the opportunity to be the guy or the second guy or in tandem with Moss, I think you have to think that Chase Brown might maybe not quite have the lead in this battle, but certainly that it's going to be more of the committee than we hoped. For that reason, I've dropped Zach Moss down a little bit. I moved Chase Brown up a little bit, but I think realistically, we're looking at a situation where Moss does a lot of the heavy work and Chase Brown's that kind of pace back that does some receiving work. We know he's been working on receiving work. That was in last week's training camp report. So I do think that this is going to remain a committee. That's bad for both of them, but this news specifically is at least good for Brown and does move him up in my rankings. These are two guys that I'll probably just generally be avoiding a little bit. Now, Will Shipley's been seeing some first-team reps with the Eagles, especially in the red zone, and that's fantastic news. We did hear going into the draft that the Eagles might draft a running back to use in conjunction with Saquon Barkley, and they did that, but they did wait until the fourth round when they got Shipley. Shipley was fantastic last year with Clemson. I do think that he's a talented back. It doesn't surprise me that he's gone past Kenny Gainwell, but it kind of surprises me he's done it this quickly. I didn't think it would happen this soon, and this is great news for both his redraft value and his dynasty value. We know that Saquon's not going to be around forever. I do think within a season or two, we could see Shipley turn into a lead back. Plus, but Saquon does have a tendency to get injured a little bit. If that happens, obviously Shipley then becomes the number one guy. The fact that he's already into that spot this soon in the preseason is fantastic news for the rookie. Meanwhile, Isaac Garendo will miss multiple weeks with a hamstring injury. Now, realistically, we knew he was probably only going to play on special teams, but this is a real ding for his dynasty value as well. The fact that he's not even going to get an opportunity to fight, this is going to basically mean that it could even have an impact on his roster spot or at least his ability to be active on game days. This is bad news all around for him. Elijah Mitchell gets a slight bump because there's always that chance that Garendo would come into camp, really impress and take that spot. And it's great news for Jordan Mason, who becomes the clear number 3 now, at least for a while. Having said that, I still don't want Mason. It's still clearly Mitchell who's the guy. Realistically, if it's not CMC in this offense, you probably don't really want any of them. Rashad Penny has retired. And that's sad, but he was great for a while. I hope he enjoys his post-NFL life. If you've got him in any leagues, you can certainly drop him. DJ Moore has signed a massive 4-year extension. Keeping in mind, he still had a couple of years left on his current deal. So we're talking about a deal that's going to take him through the next 6 seasons now. lining him up with Caleb Williams, this is great news. For me, this is positive primarily because it says that they see DJ Moore as being the guy. It's a little bit scary when he was the guy and then they brought in Keenan Allen and they brought in Rome Odunze. It's kind of like, where does Moore sit in all this? Well, clearly, Moore is still the number one. This contract says that. And for that reason, I'm feeling quite confident in DJ Moore. I've moved him up in Dynasty, moved him up a little bit in redraft, even though it's a little bit awkward taking him this year. But I think certainly in Dynasty, he's a guy that you definitely want because I think this Bears offense is going to be good for a couple of seasons now. Meanwhile, Jamison Williams has been getting open against the secondary routinely in camp. This means absolutely nothing. These sort of reports don't tell you anything at all. They don't tell you about player usage. They don't tell you about how the coaches are viewing them. We know that Jamison Williams is fast. Of course, he's going to get open against the secondary. That's always going to happen. Unless he's looking particularly sluggish, you would expect that most good NFL players are going to look good even against their own defenses. So for that reason, this tells me nothing. I'm not moving Williams. Yes, he's a breakout candidate, but realistically, don't let this sort of news sway your opinion on players and make you think that this means anything but this is just a player who's getting some buzz. Now, this is legitimately bad news. Roman Wilson's week to week after an ankle injury and could miss some time. Now, they're not talking about him missing the season necessarily, but for a rookie, you really need that first training camp. We know this can set players back. This is a real ding on his redraft value for me. He's someone that in a redraft league, I'm probably not touching. I do think that Calvin Austin to open the season will be the clear number 2, and that will make him valuable in redraft. I think that eventually Roman Wilson's going to take over that spot, but I think it might take a little bit of time. So bad news for Wilson. I do think long-term he's going to be okay. If you've got him in Dynasty, absolutely hold on to him. But in redraft, it's going to make it really awkward. You probably don't want either of these guys. I think Pat Fryermuth's probably the true number 2 in this offense. Now, DJ Chark's been running with the ones in LA with Quinton Johnston in behind him, and this means something. I still think that Johnston's got more chance of being the guy, but I mean, it's not good news for him. I've certainly dropped him a relatively high amount. I still haven't moved Chark up a lot. I don't see a situation where he's really going to be fantasy relevant, given the type of player he is. He likes to get deep. He's really not going to fit into this offense as a fantasy weapon. He's just going to be someone who can kind of give space to the run game. That makes him a valuable weapon for them, but I don't think it makes him a valuable weapon for fantasy. And for that reason, I've moved Chark up a little bit, but I've mainly just dropped Johnston down a lot, especially in redraft. Don't want either of these guys. I do think that ultimately it's going to end up being some sort of a committee. Meanwhile, Kadarius Toney is getting plenty of reps with the starters, but there was news today, and I didn't include it in here, that he has just gotten injured. That's what he does. Kadarius Toney gets injured. I mean, you can see I've moved him up because the fact that he's even getting a discussion with the starters is good, but he's not one of the top 3 players on that team. He doesn't get into my top 100 wide receivers. You don't want him in pretty much any league except really, really, really deep dynasty leagues. Michael Wilson is running with the starters, but it also seems that Zay Jones probably is too. That was a little bit unclear in that report. I mean, I guess this is generally good news. I mean, Greg Dortch is always going to be around, and he could have taken spots off Michael Wilson and potentially Zay Jones. I don't particularly want either of these guys. I feel like they both probably sit a little bit behind McBride. We saw what Wilson could do last year. The fact that he is definitively running with the ones at the moment is better than it was, and I've moved him up a little bit, but I don't know. This whole situation's awkward. I don't really want any of the receivers that's not Marvin Harrison Jr. in this team, and obviously Trey McBride, the tight end. Based on training camp usage, those expecting Kincaid that's Dalton Kincaid with the Bills, to usurp the full-time role from Dawson Knox this year and push the veteran tight end into a backup role may have their hopes dashed. That's by Joe Biscaglia via The Athletic. And I've been saying this. I did think that Kincaid was probably going to play a fair role, but still have Dawson Knox very much involved, because that's what happened last year when Knox came back from injury. Kincaid broke out, Knox came back, and suddenly Kincaid wasn't getting used the same way anymore. They want to use both of these guys, and they've now got 3 solid wide receivers. So I do think we get a situation here where Kincaid is a disappointment, at least this year for Dynasty. I think in the future he's going to be good because he is very, very talented, but Knox isn't going anywhere. And this is bad for Dawson Knox as well. If you've got Dawson Knox in Dynasty, and realistically, why do you have Dawson Knox in Dynasty? If that's your situation, you want him to go somewhere else where he can be the starter. He's not the starter at the moment, and he's not going to be the starter while Dalton Kincaid there is healthy. Realistically, for either of these guys to be useful, you need the other one to get injured. This is an ugly situation. I don't want any part of it. Meanwhile, Taysom Hill is going to do a lot of stuff this season. Well, that doesn't mean a lot, realistically, Dennis Allen. Having said that, Dennis Allen can be quite critical, and we've seen the stuff he's been saying about Kendre Miller, especially in last week's report. Go back and watch that if you missed that. He's not the kind of coach that just generally says nice things about players, and coming out and really spruiking up Taysom Hill again, I mean, that's a positive thing, but I think we kind of knew that Taysom Hill was going to be involved a little bit. I have shifted him up a little bit, not so much in Dynasty because he's old, younger than me, but still old. But I do think that, at least in redraft, he's a player that may be a little bit more reliable than we thought. He's great in best ball, but I do even think in redraft he's someone you might be able to use. Now, this one I feel a little bit awkward about. The Broncos are expecting a big season from Greg Dulcich. Now, Jeremy Fowler doesn't exactly have a history of being the most accurate reporter. Cecil Lammey does. He's the Broncos reporter, and he likes Lucas Krull. So take this with a big grain of salt. Dulcich is the guy that I've got in the lead at the moment. I have moved him up slightly after this news, but Krull's still there and about. So I don't really want either of these tight ends. It's kind of like the Giants situation where it's probably going to be a little bit messy. You know, Adam Troutman's going to be involved as well, which makes this whole situation even worse. But I do think if someone's going to break out here, I think Dulcich probably makes a little bit more sense, and this kind of backs that up. But I don't know. I'm not particularly excited about it. I haven't really moved Dulcich very much, and I'm not really moving Krull down. I just think, realistically, either of those guys has more chance than most of the number 2 options on other teams. Now, unfortunately, Michael Badgley is out for the season, and that's terrible news. Meanwhile, Riley Patterson's been released, and we're going to talk in a second about where he's gone. So Badgley obviously disappears off my rankings, and Jake Bates comes in for the Lions. I don't know. That's not really a situation I particularly want. Plus, rookie kickers is a little bit of an awkward one, so I don't have them particularly high. Meanwhile, Patterson leaving the Jaguars, that's because Cam Little won out on that job. Both of those teams are kind of like just mid-range options. Realistically, you're not drafting the 16th and 17th kickers. You need to be in a really deep dynasty league to care about either of these guys. Just wait until a couple of weeks out from the season and then just take somebody and then worry about it during the season. If you don't know how good streaming kickers and DSTs is, then check out my video earlier in the offseason where I showed that the number 3 kicker last season was streamers that were pulled from my article. That's right. There are only 2 kickers that outperformed streamers I pulled. And keep in mind, for someone to be a streamer, they had to be outside the top 12 at that point in time. So we're talking about guys who are available in most leagues, and you can get top 3 production out of them for kickers. So you don't need either of these guys. You definitely don't need Riley Patterson, who's a fantastic kicker. He's actually better than those other 2 guys, and he's been claimed off waivers from the Lions by the Commanders. And that's good news, because I do like Riley Patterson. I think he's going to be good. But Commanders typically haven't been a team that you really want the kicker of. We don't know what they're going to look like this year, but I don't know. I'm not taking the risk here. We don't even know if he's won the job over Ramiz Ahmed. I think he probably has. He was pretty good last year. I'm surprised that the Lions released him, honestly. Might have maybe he just wanted too much money. I'm not sure. But look, this is a situation where I don't want Patterson. Now, the Browns want to increase their tempo. That's from Ken Dorsey, and that's good news. That's a positive thing. That means more plays. That means good news for everybody in this offense. I'm not going to list every player involved, but I have given a few Browns players around the place a little nudge because I do think this is positive. That's certainly something we wanted to see happen, and I feel like if you've got any Browns players, you've got to feel pretty positive about it, and I think it probably helps Deshaun Watson as well. Now, lastly, I assume you have some redraft leagues coming up, and if you do, you're going to need some help because the rankings you find online are not for your league. They're just for some generic league that the person making the rankings is basing it on. Your league is different. Every league is different. I don't know how many wide receivers you're starting. I don't know how many flex spots you've got. Are you PPR or half PPR? What are your quarterback passing touchdowns worth? All of these things make a difference as to how you should rank players. And we can't know that as rankers because we just have to do generic rankings. So I've got a deal for you. For a very small price, I will specifically cater rankings to your league, specifically your league settings, personalized for you. It was very successful last year. I've already got a lot of people who did it last year coming back and wanting to do it again. So I hope you'll join us. Got a very special price of only $10 at the moment. That may go up later on, so make sure you get in now. when the opportunity's there, because if the spots start to fill, not going to have any space later on. I'm going to have to up the price to make it worthwhile. So make sure you send me an email at benwasley23@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, please hit me up on all the other socials, Instagram at the Fantasy First Down, Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O, website with all my rankings, including the updated ones, ffdfantasyfootball.com. My YouTube, you should be liking and subscribing, please, because it helps us out. And of course, my articles over at football.rasball.com. I'll be back on Friday night on the Rasball podcast. We are going live and we are talking about having the third overall pick in rookie drafts and just generally what you should be doing if you're rebuilding in Dynasty. Then I'll be back on Saturday, Sunday region with my next video. So I hope you will join us then on the Fantasy First Down.